Hello and welcome to Driving Innovation, Accelerate Your Cloud Strategy to Drive More Customer Value. Today's webinar is sponsored by Red Hat and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, I'd like to draw your attention to the Questions tab in the console. A lot of you have been saying hello there already. It's a great place to let everyone know where you're logging in from. That Q&A panel is also the place to alert me if you're having any technical issues with the event. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let me know there in the Q&A and I'll help you out. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to two ebooks. One is a unique paper applying insights from the racing world to cloud management, and the other one is about accelerating IT with managed cloud services. So you can get those in your handout along with several Actual Tech Media resources, including the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can also be found in your handout section. Just scroll to the very bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, this is going to be a great session covering the effects of economic trends on enterprise IT strategies, a lot of valuable predictions from IDC for 2024, 2025, 2026, and beyond, digital transformation insights, and other insights about accelerating your cloud strategy from a top thinker in the industry, Al Gillen. Al's Group Vice President of Software Development and Open Source at the Analyst House IDC. We'll also hear from another major authority in the industry, Chris Pinella, who's Global Director of Strategic Enterprise Accounts at Red Hat. So it's going to be really informative. Now, one note here, this event was previously recorded, so you can't ask live questions. But if you do have any questions for Red Hat, do put them in the console, and we'll make sure to get them over to the team at Red Hat so they can get back to you. And one other note is that Al and Chris make reference to a slide deck that you won't be able to see. However, you're not missing much. They're all passing references, and Al and Chris talk through everything in great detail. So again, if you'd like more information that you're getting in the presentation, do be sure to grab those ebooks in your handouts. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's hear from Tom Schmidt of CIO Marketing Services, who's going to guide the conversation today.
Top organizations are leveraging innovative software applications to address their modern organizational challenges. The combination of public cloud infrastructure and application and data services allows enterprises to develop applications faster than ever and provide better organizational outcomes. According to IDC, enterprises are placing increasing importance on ensuring that the new architecture is the foundation for future business needs. In today's interactive discussion, you'll learn how organizations are accelerating their cloud and application modernization strategy to drive innovation forward. Hello, and welcome to this video webcast titled Driving Innovation, Accelerate Your Cloud Strategy to Drive More Customer Value. Brought to you by Red Hat and Intel, CIO.com, and featuring IDC. My name's Tom Schmidt, contributing editor with CIO Marketing Services, and I'll be the host of this webcast. Joining me is Al Gillen, Group Vice President, Software Development and Open Source at IDC. Al is the co-author of the recent IDC info brief titled A Holistic Approach to Digital Transformation, Accelerating Customer Outcomes. Hello, Al.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Great. Also joining me is Chris Pinella, Global Director of Strategic Enterprise Accounts at Red Hat. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me here today, Tom.
Al, you and Chris have a great conversation in store for us today. Can you kick things off by sharing with our audience what's on your agenda and what IDC is seeing with regards to how organizations are addressing economic uncertainties and what that means with respect to innovation?
Sure, Tom, would love to do it. So, coming into this presentation today, and by the way, thanks to all of our audience for joining us today.
Mhm.
Uh, there's about 5 areas that I'd like to talk about where I'll drill into, some technology, and we'll follow up with some recommendations on what we think customers should be thinking about doing. So let me just kind of rattle through those quickly, and then we'll dive into each of these areas with a lot more depth. For starters, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room and the fact that right now in 2022, we're facing economic conditions that are creating some concerns. We've got a lot of uncertainty and, frankly, some unusual things that are taking place right now that are causing customers to think carefully about what they want to invest in and how they want to prepare for the future. The second thing I'd like to talk about is one of the things I'm most excited about, and that's that we see, if you will, what we like to refer to as a trip point for digital innovation. What we mean by that is think of a kind of a seesaw where you get enough weight and the seesaw flips from one side to the other. We believe that that's happening with regards to how organizations are embracing and utilizing software today. So we'll get into that in a lot more depth. The third area we're going to talk about is legacy modernization and the role that legacy applications and cloud play with regards to one another. We'll talk about some of the enablers to using these modern cloud platforms, including DevOps and the emergence of artificial intelligence and how DevSecOps tends to tie all this stuff together. And finally, we'll talk about software and positive business outcomes. And again, at the end of the day, this is about taking software and making it provide business value for customers. And as I said earlier, we'll wrap up with a discussion around what we think customers should be thinking about doing next and kind of summarizing this whole presentation today. So with that, let me jump into the first slide covering the economic concerns and expectations. As I said in my opening comments, I mean, this has been a most unusual year. Let me just say that, the R word, the recession word has been thrown around, and, even the experts the economic experts are often in disagreement as to whether we're in a recession or not, because the jobs market is good, but, interest rates are high and so forth. So a lot of, kind of conflicting signals that are coming through. What we are finding is that organizations, not surprisingly, are looking at this and saying, okay, what do we need to do to respond to this potential, difficult economic scenario that we're facing? So we see organizations that today are looking to minimize extra spending, for example. And we're also seeing that in some cases, customers are saying, okay, these forward-looking projects that we're doing, maybe we'll slow them down or put them on pause in order to just, make sure we're better equipped to handle whatever kind of change is going to happen over the next year. So one of the things that we do is we do a lot of survey work at IDC, and one of our many surveys is something we refer to as our FERS survey, FERS, or Future Enterprise Resiliency and Spending. And that's a look at what customer expectations are going forward. So let me bring some data up for that particular survey. This is data that came from a recent wave earlier this year in January. And the question that we asked that I think is really interesting is just, what's the, what are the uncertainties that you're facing and how do you think that's going to affect things like GDP and spending and that sort of thing? And what you can see here, and I've got data for both worldwide, and by the way, this is a really big survey. It's an N of over 1,000, and in the US alone, we've got 254 respondents. And you can see that the expectation is that the GDP is going to be lower than what was previously expected. That may not necessarily be a surprise to all of it, but this is documentation that kind of says, you're not alone in thinking like, gee, this may be a tough year coming up and we may need to be prepared for how we're going to handle this. And by the way, one of the things that I think is very interesting is I've been at IDC since 1999, so I've gotten to watch a couple of major economic events unfold, including the dot-com implosion back in the early 2000s and the subprime mortgage collapse that it caused, was it 2008 or so, that it caused a lot of economic impact. And one of the things that we see typically happen is when there's one of these major economic events, and by the way, the same exact thing happened in March of 2020, in April of 2020, as COVID began to become such a factor in the industry. And what organizations tend to do is they tend to freeze spending on things that are highly transactional in nature. So we stop buying devices, we stop buying PCs, we potentially stop buying servers and things like that. What we don't do is we don't stop spending on software and we don't stop building software simply because these tend to be longer term investments. So for example, typically software products are acquired on either a annual subscription or more typically a multi-year subscription, which means that we can't necessarily stop spending on software next month because we feel that there might be some economic uncertainty coming. So anyway, that's a scenario where we are today. And again, it's really just a reaffirmation of what you're probably feeling in your own organization. So the question is, what comes next? And the answer is that organizations are going to be looking at, okay, how do we plan for the future and what comes next? So for example, we see organizations that are looking at this as an opportunity. And one of the things that I've found really fascinating in watching previous downturns is that we see, in particular, the tech organizations are especially good at this. Yes, they probably have some number of layoffs that occur as part of their planning for the future. But in many cases, these layoffs are part of a larger strategy, which typically is, okay, we're going to stop investing in this part of the business, which maybe has run its course and it's probably in its later years of life cycle. But we've got this other part of the business which is growing aggressively, and we need to invest there. So oftentimes we see the organizations downsizing in these areas where the business is mature and investing in the areas where the opportunities are going to be coming in the future as we come out of this economic downturn. And again, that's something we see happening even in this particular economic downturn. So the question we asked as part of our first study is, what do you expect is going to happen going forward in 2024? And the data says basically that we're expecting the GDP to be higher. And once again, you can see that the US is tracking pretty closely to what the worldwide overall total is. What I think is interesting from my point of view is we've seen an almost complete flip-flop between what we saw for the expectations of 2023 versus what we're going to expect to see in 2024. And again, the organizations are saying, no longer are we concerned that GDP will be low, but we're expecting it to be higher. So just a couple of additional points I'd like to make here. These are predictions that IDC makes, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. But there's two things I just really would like to bring up here. And one of the things we expect to see is in 2024, we believe that the leading companies in every economic sector or every business sector are going to be using technology as a way to, if you will, engineer their way out of the downturn. And the organizations that continue to be successful over the long term are those who are really good at driving their innovation through the use of software, and not just simply a one-shot deal with regards to building software, but in terms of rolling that capability and that experience and that process that they have forward to build one winning product after another. So Chris, I think I know you have some perspective on what your customers are seeing. What would you like to add here?
Al, you did a great overview of across, where we are now and, what the next possible 18 months could look like. These macroeconomic factors that you've presented really distill down into two main themes for our customers when it comes to their technology investments. First is a stronger focus on IT areas to drive efficiencies, including automation. And then the second is an increased diligence on new technologies that are under consideration by our customer organizations. This includes cloud platforms and emerging technologies, really looking at where and how they can drive acceleration for their organization.
Great. Okay, so as I move to the next slide, I mentioned earlier in my opening comments this notion of the seesaw that tips. So we'll talk about that next. And what I'm going to present here are a series of what we refer to as futurescape predictions. So just the background on that is that IDC, every year, starting in about June or July of each year, we begin to prepare our predictions for what's going to happen over the next 5 years. And we organize all of our analysts into about 75 groups or 75 teams that each individually build what we refer to as an IDC futurescape. And those futurescapes, each individually have 10 predictions that are really about the technology changes, the employment changes, things like that are going to happen over the next 5 years. And again, that involves close to 1,000 IDC analysts from around the world that all collaborate on this. The predictions that I'm going to present, I've actually organized them in a chronological fashion. And these are from two futurescapes, which I'm personally involved in. It's our futurescape focused on developers and DevOps, and our futurescape focused on what we refer to as the future of digital innovation. And that's how we look at the organizations that use software to make a differentiation in their business. So let's start with 2023. So here's the first prediction, and that's that 65% of large organizations are going to have permanent representation into the business by the tech folks and vice versa. So what I'll do with each of these predictions is I've got the date, and I've got kind of a simple summary at the top, and that's really in essence what this prediction is all about. So in 2023, it's really about all hands on deck. Everybody has to work together to maintain and grow the business as we go forward. Then as we look at by 2024, we've seen this notion that the technology we use is going to lead us out of this economic crisis, this challenge that we're facing right now. And again, we've got this notion that the top 5 companies in each sector are going to be successful because of the way they use technology. So one of the things that's also going to happen as we go forward, organizations are increasingly looking at how do we measure the value that technology is bringing to the business. And it used to be that the notion of measuring productivity of developers, for example, was how many lines of code did you crank out today? Well, the reality is that's actually not even a valid metric, simply because these days the value is what the software can do for the business, not how many lines of code that were written to create that. So that the prediction by 2025 is that organizations are going to be using key performance indicators or KPIs to track the success, not just simply of the development work, but rather of the impact on the business that their development activities are having. Now, this is where the CISO starts to tip, and these first 3 have really been focusing on what we're doing today. And as we go forward from 2026 through 2028, it's really about how the industry changes and how the roles will shift for developers, DevOps professionals, operations professionals, and people like that. So starting with 2026, this one I'm particularly excited about, and we'll talk more about it as we get further into the deck, but the notion of developers become curators. So historically, developers wrote every line of code. You started with a blank screen, you started typing, and you created an application. Well, going forward, the role of the developer is going to change fairly significantly. We've got artificial intelligence, which is writing code for developers. But in addition to that, developers are responsible for finding pieces of code, and very often that comes from the open source software community, that they can actually integrate that software, that functionality into their applications. And the developer's roles shifts from that of someone who writes all of the code to someone who actually writes the code that connects these different pieces together, and they become responsible for the content of this code. Is the code good? Does it meet their business needs and things like that? So the CISO starts a tip where the developer's role is changing significantly. And of course, artificial intelligence accelerates this whole thing. And right now we're seeing a lot of exciting things happen in the industry related to artificial intelligence, which is changing the role, not just simply of the developers, but of the business professionals as well. But from my team's research, where we look at developers and DevOps and things like that, we're particularly excited about the use of AI in that area. And finally, in 2028, really it's about smart products, right? The products that we're seeing come into the industry are increasingly software defined. So you buy a new thing, and whether it's whether it's a vacuum cleaner or whether it's an electric vehicle or something like that, chances are good there's a tremendous amount of software going into that product that makes the product smarter and better. And over time, we believe these smart products are going to be where the not only the majority of the revenue, but frankly the more profitable revenue streams are going to be coming to these organizations from, and that really changes the outlook of the industry. And frankly, a lot of these areas are dependent upon technologies that a company like Red Hat produces. Chris, what's your sense on how this industry is changing?
Oh, Al, absolutely seeing that. First, however, I just want to say I'm enamored by the term future casting. It just sets the stage for a really forward-looking vision, and I want to start using that with my team when we look at strategic solutions. But really back to the slide that you just went through with the data points, it's been really valuable to set the stage in terms of where we are now with the market impact on industries, but also being able to highlight and hopefully inspire a little bit our audience via this future casting that your team does, to show that there are compelling opportunities to integrate emerging technologies, really focused around leveraging data to drive that increased value, to bring us forward out of where we are now in these macroeconomic conditions. These themes are things that we also hear from our customers. And the questions we get asked really are around, how do we create the ability to decouple legacy applications and workflows to be able to augment them with some deep learning and AI capabilities? And with that, how do we actually build and leverage a single source of real-time data that these applications can sit on top of to be a single source of our predictive decision-making? And then past that, these new emerging technologies and modernizations, how do we create a resilient and stable, secure system in a hybrid cloud environment that we really can leverage the acceleration for bringing all these pieces together with?
Well, interesting. You should bring up legacy modernization. That's what we're going to talk about next. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is we have been looking at what happens with legacy applications. And by the way, let me just make an interesting observation is that chances are good if your organization is creating software today, you're creating what will be tomorrow's legacy applications, right? So things that were created 10 years ago probably don't use the same modern techniques that the things you're building today. And at some level, you may be charged with maintaining and supporting those things over the long term going forward. What we see happening, and by the way, just as an aside, I mean, on the x86 platform, there's plenty of legacy software. This is not a mainframe statement anymore. This is really about every platform. So what happens to these legacy applications as we move into a modern cloud platform era? And this chart actually shows some of the areas where customers are telling us that they're thinking about, or they're investing effort. And the blue line that we're looking at first is the 2020 to 2022 effort that's been put into things like rehosting and replatforming. And let's talk about these terms a little bit before I talk about the actual numbers. So rehosting is the notion of taking an application from where it is today, which is probably on a VM, on a physical server in your data center, and moving it to a new host. And maybe that's it might be a cloud platform running a VM there. It may be in a hosted environment where you've abandoned having your own data center and paying for the maintenance and power for that, and actually just contracting with somebody to run something in their data center. Or, there may be other scenarios as well. The notion of replatforming is where we take that application that we've now moved from our classic servers into a new cloud environment, and we're starting to take advantage of some of the things that are available in that cloud environment. So for example, maybe we're moving from an on-premises, database service that we were running ourselves to using a cloud database service as for instance, and that might be an example of replatforming. The notion of rewriting, we take an application and we actually rewrite the application and try to make it better or replace it altogether. And, we certainly do see that happening, but in many cases, that's not the preferred motion for a legacy application. The notion of refactoring is where we start to take an application and we actually alter how the application is deployed and run. This may be something such as taking an application that was on a VM and moving it into a container. It may be more intrusive than that. Perhaps we're changing some of the core services that are being consumed. Maybe we're extending an application to consume maybe some artificial intelligence capabilities and things like that. And finally, at the upper left corner, we've got this notion of the integration of applications with modern development tools. This is actually a really exciting thing because this means that we're starting to take our applications and modernize them and take advantage of some of the things that are available that are outside of our applications today. So we look at how is the spend and how is the time spent going to shift as we look going from 2022 out to 2022 through 2024. So what happens is you see that there's actually a shift away from things like rehosting and replatforming, and it's more about rewriting and refactoring and integration with modern tools. And again, what this is telling me is a couple things. Number one is that the notion of replatforming probably will have begun to have run through its life cycle at this point in time, meaning we've already moved the applications that were easy to move, and we don't need to necessarily move more things. And we're not necessarily doing a lot of rehosting at that point because again, most of this stuff has been moved. But we are continuing to focus on rewriting and refactoring and integration with modern tools. So again, the data here really suggests that there's this transition taking place. Now, what I think is especially fascinating as you do any of these things, whether it's rehosting or replatforming or rewriting or refactoring applications, typically there's a cloud platform involved. So what's the business value that customers get out of that? So customers tell us that 56% of them say that it's about the productivity we get from a cloud platform. And we move to a cloud platform and perhaps it allows us to use DevOps more effectively. It probably allows us to update our applications and address new audiences. 34% tell us they can achieve business value because they're accessing new innovative features that they weren't able to do on premises. And another third of the folks say that this is really about accelerating the ability of applications to be modernized. And I would very much agree with that. I mean, if you're going to modernize an application, you're probably not going to do it on a server running in your data center on a VM. You're probably going to be moving it to a cloud because it's those cloud services that are that are opening the doors for you to have access to all these new capabilities that are available in the industry today. So basically some summary thoughts here. Number one is, legacy application, typically that means moving to a cloud. And my own personal point of view, is that over the long term, is that more and more customers will continue to move up stack and will be moving less to infrastructure clouds and be moving more to platform clouds, meaning they're going to be looking for a platform as a service and application platforms to run their logic, as opposed to running an infrastructure stack, say on a unmanaged Kubernetes platform, simply because that gives them more value. It allows the customers to focus on what they do best, meaning, are you a bank or you're an infrastructure software company? And if you're a bank, you probably should be focusing on writing better banking applications. And again, the underlying, the bottom line on all this is really about being more productive with your business applications. So, Chris, I mean, you guys, Red Hat has a cloud platform. I mean, this is something which is probably near and dear to you.
Oh, absolutely, Al. What the past few years of migration to hybrid cloud services has really brought to light is that simply re-platforming applications into the cloud is not driving accelerated organizational value. And in some cases, it's driving up costs and unanticipated increases using compute and storage consumption in these environments. So the IDC data that you just walked through is really reflecting a more intentional approach to assessing a set of applications and tying the refactoring or additional integration into these modern tools directly back to these initiatives' ROI. In addition, it allows the organization to be more consistent. Your applications should work in New York the same way they work in Munich or Sao Paulo. So a large global airline customer of ours based in Asia came out of the pandemic struggling to reduce their operational efforts and the costs of their self-managed bespoke environments. Al, really back to the, are you a bank or are you a tech firm? This was a question of, are you an airline? Are you a tech firm? And our Red Hat teams worked with this airline to develop a multi-phased adoption of managed cloud services to provide that flexible, scalable, and on-demand platform in order to support a variety of their workloads, whether they were refactored, rewritten, reintegrated, or in some cases, there was some net new application development on top of them. So the results that we saw with this customer was increases in productivity. We really improved their time to market from several weeks to less than an hour of being able to deploy direct customer value, whether it was to a flight crew or to an end customer like you or I. The increase in efficiency, we really reduced all of their overhead expenditure when it came to supporting these environments. And then through these standardized, modernized platforms, there was a performance and stability increase for these applications, meaning the customers had a higher level of customer satisfaction because the app worked when you pulled it up on the phone the same way it worked if you went to their website or a flight crew looking for their schedule. It was all just one uniform set of platform.
Yeah, that's in a nutshell, right? An airline should be flying the planes and that should be their focus. Okay, so one of the things that's ties across, and again, as you move to a cloud platform, the notion of being able to use DevOps is really, it really goes hand in hand, right? You don't move to a cloud platform without embracing DevOps practices and DevOps technologies, enabling technologies. So here are some benefits that customers have told us, and this is results of another study. I mean, that my team has conducted at IDC. This is focused on DevOps specifically. And here is just an example of 4 areas of benefit that customers have told us are important to them through their use of DevOps. So really it's productivity was the number one thing at 31%. Folks said, that they're expecting an improvement in their productivity in terms of the, what their developers and their ops people are able to accomplish. Same thing is security. And let's face it, security is something that's very front of mind for a lot of organizations today. And not just simply about development, but security is obviously a much broader topic than that. Interestingly enough, one of the things that we find that's fascinating is that not all organizations still today believe they've got strong C-level support. And this is a sort of thing that, something like a security problem makes it a C-level concern very, very quickly. In terms of time to market, so almost a quarter of the folks that we talked to said they're expecting a faster time to value. And again, what these things we've covered here, they're really about, how do we do better with what we're doing? How do we become more productive? How do we get things out faster? How do we be more successful? What I think is really interesting as we get to the 4th item at only 17% compared to, as much as 31% for these other topics, is expecting costs to drop. And yes, cost concern remains an issue. And, in tough economic times, cost always becomes a focal point. But at the same time, this is not necessarily the number one thing that people are thinking about. And again, it's really about what value are we able to bring to the business here. Chris?
Well, Al, there's a lot of new and modernized environments that out there that really could benefit from teams reviewing and revising their DevSecOps processes end to end. These, as we said, the modernization drives looking at new ways of working. So taking time to actually assess your processes in tandem with hybrid cloud and acceleration, could it reveal additional areas for improvement and standardization? Definitely around security policies, in terms of improvement of code test and validation or network vulnerability scanning, compliance processes, being able to agilely respond to changes as these compliance processes evolve, and just standardization in general around playbooks, how to actually deploy in a very seamless fashion through all of the stages to go from idea inception from modern application out to end customer value, and where are those opportunities to reduce manual tasks. Now, we worked with a Europe-based oil and gas company to help them rework their DevSecOps processes in tandem with scaling a hybrid cloud strategy. And the results of doing this with them and showing them some of our best practices that we've developed across our client suite globally within this program with this customer, it saved them more than 6,000 work hours just by centralizing their tools and processes and adding automation. We were able to increase their service levels of responding to developers 10 to 15 times faster than they already were previously. And in addition, we helped them develop some improved security methodologies with better role-based access controls to allow for just faster gating through the process of deploying new applications and value to customers.
Great, thanks, Chris. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is artificial intelligence. So, these days, none of us are looking at a future where artificial intelligence doesn't have some ramifications for us. And what's becoming evident is that there's probably no part of the business that is not going to be either accelerated or somehow or other enabled through artificial intelligence. So this is some data that our company collected, and my colleagues that do our artificial intelligence research at IDC collected this data. And here's just, these are 5 bullet points of a much larger set of data that we have. And these were questions that were asked of large organizations. And the questions, what are the top 5 business objectives for using artificial intelligence in new projects that you're doing? So you can see that, again, operational efficiency comes in, and 40% of the people said this is really the objective we have. Improving customer experience and satisfaction. I mean, we see that happening already. I mean, some of the early components, things like chatbots and so forth, have already been common in the industry. We're going to see a much more sophisticated level of intelligence that can be brought to bear on that kind of engagement that doesn't necessarily have a human actively involved from moment to moment, which means that it's a cost savings and a benefit in terms of improving productivity and still at the same time giving your customers a better experience. The third one here, the increase in innovation. I touched on this one earlier specifically for developers, and this is not purely about developers, but there's something we said here, and it applies for developers just as it does for other people in the across the organization in terms of as you increase innovation and improve employee productivity using artificial intelligence. One of the things that we're all going to be charged with, and by the way, this is especially true for developers who are using AI for building software, is do we have ethical AI content being generated? So that becomes an important consideration. And that ties back to that notion of developers as curators. Frankly, with artificial intelligence, just about every employee in the company is going to have some level of curation responsibility just to make sure that when we're using artificial intelligence, we're going to be using it in an ethically appropriate way, and it's bringing good value and content which is reliable to our users. And finally, the fifth item, which is hardly a low ranking here, even 36% of the folks said we're expecting artificial intelligence to help us with improving our sustainability. Now, what's fascinating to me is, again, this piece of the survey data was specific to large organizations, but the large organizations told us that they're going to spend serious money on this. Over 3/4 of the organizations said they were going to spend over $1 million in 2022 on artificial intelligence. I mean, that's not nothing. I mean, that's some pretty big investments that organizations are making. Next, the question becomes, if you're using artificial intelligence, what are you applying it against? And one of the things that we found is extremely common is that organizations say, hey, it's about the data that we have the most of, and that's the transactional data that we have within our organization today. So we're seeing that transactional data is an increasingly common target to apply the artificial intelligence against. And then finally, in terms of artificial intelligence, it is available in public clouds, right? You don't typically stand up a chat GPT system on your local server in your data center. So as a result, we're finding that this is very much going to be an enablement, which is made possible by cloud platforms and cloud services. But at the same time, you're probably going to want your applications to be close, your applications and your data to be close to these artificial intelligence services so that you can take advantage of all of the content and all of the information you have to work against. And finally, I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about the application development. We see this notion as companies begin to refactor and rewrite components of applications. What are they going to do? Chances are good they're going to be taking advantage of artificial intelligence as one of the underlying enablers for these new applications. So again, this is going to change the world as we know it in just about every dimension. So Chris, I bet you guys are excited about artificial intelligence as much as we are.
Oh, absolutely, Al. In fact, it's funny that you mentioned ChatGPT. I was considering using that to write my slide notes for this presentation. But upon exploring the platform a little bit more, I realized I tell better jokes than ChatGPT does right now. But AI in general, overall, slide notes aside, is certainly leading the way for our customer conversations. Real-time analytics and decision-making are table stakes in terms of being able to extract more value from our data. However, AI is still very much an emerging technology, as you said, in terms of how deploying it can help drive those outcomes for organizations. So what we're seeing is many restricted use cases of implementations as the organizations are looking and learning from the value that AI as an emerging technology can bring. And it's interesting that you mention sort of extracting humans out of the process, because one of the programs that we did recently with a large US government contractor was an advanced artificial intelligence program at the edge to support data gathering and analysis for military platforms in what they call geographically constrained environments using unmanned aerial systems or drones. So areas, where there is possibly conflict or just were hard to get to by regular military personnel, that they decided, let's try gathering some geographical data using these drones. And what we created were these very small distributed platforms, basically gathering data at the edge as it was being collected by the drones, increasing the capability to drive faster field-based decision-making. And that decision-making, across the various distributions allowed for more accurate identification and assessment of the data because they were able to capture very quickly a broader swath across a wider geography. And then that data rolled up and really created a full view of the situation based on the results for military decision makers. So it was very impactful and showed the value of kind of decoupling human at the edge instead of mate for decision making.
That's a great example of how artificial intelligence can really be applied in a smart way. And, it's not, while it certainly makes sense in that kind of an environment where, it's not, suitable or necessarily easy to put humans in that particular location. But that's true really for any kind of a technology where we're capturing data. So for example, maybe we've got sensors monitoring a bridge or a building or, a rail line or whatever it might be. And all the data that's captured, you've got, volumes and volumes of data, which simply says everything's okay, everything's okay, everything's okay. And to be able to find that anomalous event that takes place where something is not okay and being able to isolate that and relate it to surrounding parameters is something that artificial intelligence can do for us. And by sending the valuable data back upstream rather than all the data, number one, you reduce the bandwidth consumption. And number two, you actually increase the probability that it can be acted on in a prompt manner because you're able to find it. So in any event, that's a great example. the next thing I want to try to do is I want to try, tie some of these pieces together. So let's talk about the notion of modern applications and DevSecOps and DevOps and so forth. How do we tie this together, and what's the benefit that customers are expecting to get here? So there's some key metrics that we found that customers are looking for specifically related to DevSecOps. So for example, there's this notion of vulnerability escape rates. And what that refers to is the number of flaws that actually get through a DevOps or a DevSecOps process and actually make it into production, so that we find the flaw after it's been actually released into a general, deployment scenario. And obviously that's a scenario we want to avoid. And to the extent that we can reduce that, that's important. And 34% of the folks that we surveyed said, that's one of the most important values we get, is reducing this escape rate. The next thing for when you do have to fix something once it's in the field, it's about the time spent to patch a production application. And 24% of the folks said, this is one of the most important impacts on our business, is being able to reduce the incidents, or reduce the scenario where we actually have to go back and patch things after they're in production. So there's another thing that actually ties in pretty closely to that, and that's the notion of compliance and regulatory compliance. And when you think about, when you have a regulatory compliance audit, the notion of having a good, solid DevSecOps process behind the applications that are being audited, chances are good you're going to have a higher rate of successful completion of those audits in your environment. So again, DevSecOps means that you actually are able to reduce costs associated with those audits. And by the way, you get the benefit of having the applications run better and be secure as part of it. So how do people really feel about the security of their overall environment? Well, we asked folks, do you feel that you're, highly confident, or just confident, or somewhat confident, or not confident at all about how secure your platform and your environment is? And interestingly enough, we found a pretty high level of confidence. 76% of the folks we surveyed said, we feel confident or very confident that we've got good security in our applications. And that's really where we want to be. We really want to move the needle up to a much higher level, where we're able to feel highly confident that our applications are secure, and not to be overly confident. Of course, you always have to be concerned that there's something you're missing, but at the same time, having those tools in place allows you to at least have the data to say that we've done all these checks to make sure that we don't have any of these common flaws. One of the things that we see happening is that we're seeing actually a pretty big uptick in the assignment and redeployment and hiring of folks that are focused specifically on DevSecOps. And we're finding that the DevSecOps employment numbers are actually growing at double-digit rates right now. Modern applications, if you go back over the last 5 to 8 years, DevOps was a very common practice that was becoming a normal part of building a modern application. From this point forward, you're going to find it's going to be DevOps and DevSecOps, both are going to be applied. Secure supply chain for software, that has actually become a concern that a lot of customers are interested in looking at today. And just a reminder that these modern applications we're building, they live on cloud platforms. So they have some level of surface area that has some vulnerability, and that's something you have to be concerned about. And really, the bottom line for all of this, it's really about accelerating the speed of development, but doing it in a safe and careful manner. So Chris, over to you.
Okay, well, absolutely. A safe and careful manner, modern application development, they just go hand in hand. These are two areas that are really innovation at its best. So question for you, Al, right now, if you were to think about security, what's top of mind?
Well, for me personally, probably my own personal finances and my investments and things like that.
Oh, absolutely. Look at what's happening in the banking system, unfortunately, right now. How do
Right.
I, as a consumer, have the peace of mind that my cash and assets are securely held within a financial institution? And then our customers, who are the financial institutions, are asking us, what more can we do to help our end customers, like maintain that trust with them, that yes, their assets and cash are secure within our institutions. And it's definitely a question that we're seeing ripple across the financial industry. One of our teams actually worked with a global financial institution who needed to continue business as usual, timely services out to their clients, maintaining this trust in the face of things such as like natural disasters, There's climate change implications into some of the areas they operated globally, and unfortunately, in some areas, also civil unrest. So this financial customer sought to really modernize their applications, be able to increase their agility to respond to events, and being able to shift access and capacity across regions by adding more automation and running in a managed cloud services environment to support their day-to-day operations. So meaning if one subregion went out or something was happening within a country and access was restricted, they could shift all their capacity over into other areas across the globe and not have any of their customers impacted. So we worked with this customer to create standardized reusable playbooks and workflows. We ran some disaster recovery exercises with them to show how easy it would be to fail over into different regions, as well as how to keep their compliance and security policies updated in a very agile and sometimes reactive fashion. And this required automating manual tasks, centralizing a lot of their processes again, and it was all in the context of doing this within their hybrid cloud environment. So through doing this, and it was a large multi-year project, we were able to exceed their performance and availability requirements from when we set them out. We also met and exceeded the industry standard security requirements for the work that we were doing, which was really fantastic to see for our teams. And then, going back and measuring, we were saving them hundreds of hours of work through being able to dynamically automate and provision environments, and just improving their infrastructure and environmental reliability. Which again, all of these things drove and improved trust within their customers that yes, everything is secure and I can access it regardless of what's happening around me in the world.
Great, thanks, Chris. So, as we start to kind of wrap this all up and think about, what are we really talking about here? Really, this whole discussion has been around how do we take the notion of building modern applications, putting them on modern infrastructure, on modern cloud platforms, and actually bringing a value prop to our clients and a value to our business itself. So one of the things that we've asked customers, end user organizations say, what is the value, or what do you perceive the value of the software that you're creating, right? So as you look at some of the results here, so for example, it's cited as the most important building block of our business. And by the way, I would argue that for a lot of organizations, that is really what it's all about. This is the future of the business. And you can see that 23% of the folks cited that as the most important element for them to be focused on. But also, software is seen as an asset for generating new revenue streams. And again, we see this happening in a number of ways. Some organizations are actually allowing API access to applications and or data they're creating, or they may be creating brand new data sets that in and of themselves become a product that these organizations are selling because they're becoming a digital innovator. We've looked at a number of organizations, including some who are in industries that you wouldn't necessarily think of as a data industry. Like, for example, we talked to a company that's in the shipbuilding industry, which creates a digital twin for every one of their vessels these days, and they collect all this data on the operational parameters, and suddenly the company finds itself in the business of selling that data to organizations like insurance companies and financial services firms that want to handle leasing or financing for ships. So, it's interesting to say that, how this becomes really valuable. Down a couple layers down further, an asset to build a reputation. And by the way, this notion via open source software distribution, this is an interesting notion. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, organizations didn't want to, put anything in open source. And these days we find more organizations are looking at this opportunity saying, gee, if we take some of what we create and we make it open source, we establish ourselves as a credible community player, we get better visibility. And by the way, it opens up the avenue for us to monetize this software in other ways. Opportunities to create business outcomes and avoid disruption, things like that. If you jump all the way to the bottom, the lowest item on this list is that we see the software we're creating as a money sink. Boy, oh boy, if this is not a change, right? If 15 or 20 years ago, IT was typically seen as a kind of a cost center as opposed to a profit enabling center. And that model has changed completely. So a couple of just takeaways from this slide. So modern application development, it's really about digital innovation, and it is seen as critical and successfully critical at that for the business. Great applications. Great applications lead to a better business. They help generate revenue. They help build your reputation. They help make the organization be successful in places, in competitive components of the market or segments of the market that probably didn't even exist 10 or 15 years ago. And modern applications, they deploy in all kinds of places, on public cloud in particular, on the edge. And again, modern applications are things that allow us to build these applications and deploy them in all these different places. So, and Chris, again, you folks make the building blocks that customers are building these applications on top of. I mean, what are you hearing from customers about their expectations around their modern applications they're building?
Oh, very similar to all of the points that you just walked through, Al. And one of the things that we've been most excited about, it was really the shift from IT being a cost center to an actual revenue driver for the organizations. And the way that they are able to do this goes back to the top point on your slide about pulling together innovation, acceleration via modernization and team efficiencies. Really enabling an organization's ability to accelerate that end customer value through software and ultimately a product, whether it's consumer or mission-based. That customer centricity, really that focus on the customer, should be the driving factor when you're looking at those opportunities to accelerate your innovation through hybrid cloud strategies.
Great. Okay, so let's bring this thing in for a landing and just provide kind of a summary of what we talked about. So number one, 2023, as we know, it's kind of an oddball year. There's an uncertain outlook, but expectations are the industry is going to bounce back. And if you're too far down in your foxhole this year, you run the risk of not being prepared for what comes next year. So number two, organizations that are investing in preparation are going to be better prepared to gain market share and disrupt competitors as you come out. I mean, if it's a scenario where either you disrupt or you get disrupted, obviously you want to be the disruptor. Legacy modernization, it's a real thing. It's happening today. It's going to continue. And by the way, probably for the next 10, 20 years, we're going to be continuing to modernize applications. But again, it's the cloud platforms that are making it possible for us to do that and do it effectively. Artificial intelligence, this is a game changer in just about every aspect of our industry. It's really an exciting area for us. And I think that, we're all going to be seeing artificial intelligence changing the world as we know it today. And finally, modern applications, they are absolutely a key driver for our future success. Chris, is there anything you want to add here before we turn it back to Tom?
Al, I think you succinctly wrapped this up so well. Our work here is done today.
Great. Tom, back over to you.
Thanks, Al. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's webcast. I want to give a big thanks to our speakers, Al Gillen of IDC and Chris Pinella of Red Hat, for sharing their insights with us today. And thanks especially to you, our viewers, for tuning in. Please be sure to check out the resources section of your player for some valuable Red Hat and IDC content. For Red Hat, Intel, IDC, CIO.com, and CIO Marketing Services, I'm Tom Schmidt.
Okay, and finally, it's time for the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Eric Cooper from Maryland. So congratulations to Eric Cooper from Maryland. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Red Hat for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.